The coronavirus pandemic has disrupted our life in so many ways. Even for me, that I just started to talk in physical conferences in the end of the year of 2019, all the physical conference that came after has been cancelled. And in this situation in life, you maybe can be sad. But from my perspective for life, we don't have time to be sad. Life is so short. And because of that, we always need to think about how to create good situations from bad ones. And this is exactly what I've done when the coronavirus pandemic has started. In the first days, we have a lot more time to spend at home. And in the first few days, I was rearrange my apartment, move everything, change everything, open my sofa to a bed that sometimes I can sleep in my living room, the aquarium that didn't work for 5 years. I put some water and some fishes and everything to create a good mood to stay at home. And then came the first weekend in the lockdown that we cannot go out anywhere. And I thought to myself, what I will do with all this free time in the weekend? And I remember that several years ago, I created a pure CSS game, which is called Kill the Birds, that so many web developers all around the world loved it so much. But I thought to myself that in the last several years, I learned so many new tricks in CSS that now I can create a lot better one. But I needed an idea of what it will be about, and it was one of the most easiest ideas that I had in my life. If you are now living in the coronavirus pandemic time, why not to create a coronavirus game? And this is exactly what I've done. I created this pure CSS game, which is called the Coronavirus Invaders. And everything that you're seeing right now is done only while using CSS and HTML. Yes, for the CSS part, I'm using CSS preprocessors. And even for the HTML part, I'm using an HTML preprocessor. But all the logic of this game, like when I'm clicking on the UMI and it's opening a pop-up, the logic of the opening and the closing of the pop-up is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click the Save the World button, the play button of the game, it will hide the main navigation and it will open the game frame itself. Even that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click on those coronavirus creatures, they will be disappear and the score of the game will go up. Even that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And what about the countdown? No, really? The countdown is built only while using CSS. But before you're writing any single line of code in your own project, you need to think about something that inspires you. And I don't know why, I remember an old CodePen that I was sewing in the middle of the year of 2019 with this cute creature that reminded me a little bit coronavirus creatures. And I needed to think about a name for the game and to think about how to design the main navigation. And I don't know, I had in my mind the Chicken Invaders game. I took the Invaders word and some other design ideas on how to design the main navigation. And when you are thinking about inspiration, is always you are taking other older ideas that you saw in the past and you're creating from them something else, something new. And the first thing that I wanted to create in my project is to create the coronavirus creature. And it's nice to see that this was my inspiration, but in the end I created it different and I love it because this is my own coronavirus creature. And then I wanted to start to create the HTML of those coronavirus creatures. And for me, the HTML is very important. It's not just to take HTML element and to throw them to an HTML document. No, this is an object of an HTML. And it needs to be very precise. Then I created this label with the class of coronavirus, and I put it inside input type radio. And you may ask why I'm using here label HTML element and why there is input type radio inside. This is part of the logic that we will talk about it a little bit later. But all the visual part of the coronavirus creature that you're seeing right now are starting inside its body. We have the body, inside we have the 12 hairs, and of course it's both eyes. But from the beginning, I saw that I have a lot of repetition in my HTML code, like to create those 12 span HTML elements. And in the real game, I have 100 coronavirus creatures. and I didn't want to copy paste them one by one. And I needed to think a way to solve this problem. And in my first time in my life, I'm using an HTML preprocessor, which is called Pug, that give us possibility to create repetition in the HTML code. And yes, for the CSS part, I'm using the CSS preprocessor of SAS that I'm using, I think, in the last 10 years for every one of my projects. And now, instead of doing this repetition, for example, I can write it in Pug. In Pug, we have variables, loops, and a lot of other stuff that we can do it in a lot more smarter way. And as you can see, Pug is written very different from regular HTML. Yes, it's being compiled to HTML. But when you are working with Pug, you cannot write half Pug and half HTML. If you are working with Pug, you need to do everything in Pug. And this means that I need to update all the project and all the HTML parts to the new Pug, how it's being written. And you maybe can think that maybe this is hard to work with Pug, but all this project I was creating in 2 days in the weekend, and I was learning Pug meanwhile I was creating this project. Really, everyone can learn Pug, it's really not so hard. And now I wanted to start to paint the visual part of the coronavirus creature. I started with the body, I gave it position relative. Why position relative? Because all the other parts need to be according to its body. And the body got width and height of 100 pixels, background color black, and to get the circle shape, I just gave it border radius of 50%. To create all of the eyes and to select the two classes, if you know, the I1 and I2 together, combined, I want to select them both, I'm using here the attribute selector with the star character. This select me both of the eyes combined together. And I gave both of them width of 20 pixel, height of 26 pixel, and background color white and border radius of 50%. Because in the width and the height are a little bit different, it's getting the egg shape that is nice to get. And to locate both of the eyes, I gave both of them position absolute, top 25%, the first eye left 25%, the right eye right 25%, and little bit rotate Z to the inside with the transform property. To create the inner part of the eyes and without adding another HTML element, I'm using here the before pseudo element of both of the eyes. And in the same way, width, height, background color black, and border radius of 50%. And if you are looking what I created until now is just circles, circles, and circles. To create the hairs of the coronavirus creature and to select all the classes of all those hairs, you remember hair 1 until hair 12? I'm using here again the attribute selector with the star character. And every one of the hairs is created from two boxes that I'm creating with the before and the after pseudo element. The after pseudo element is the root of the hair that I'm putting in the bottom. The crown of the hair is the before pseudo element that I'm putting up above. And to get the circle shape of the crown of the corona hair, I'm using here, of course, border radius of 50%. To locate all those hair, first I gave all of them position absolute and locate all of them in the middle, in the center of the coronavirus creature. Exactly here. Position absolute and here in the middle, in the center. And now, one by one, I want to put all those hairs around the coronavirus creature. The first hair, I'm giving it a transform property with a rotate Z value of 0 degrees, that doesn't do anything. And then translate Y value with a value of minus 65 pixels that taking the hair from the center to the top. But the second hair need to be top but little bit to the right. How I'm doing it? Hair 2 will now get a transform property with a rotate Z value of 30 degrees and only then the translate Y value with a value of minus 65 pixels. This way the second hair will go top and little bit to the right. And if you didn't know until now, the order of the value in this transform property are very important because they are affecting each other. And in this way I just located all those 12 hairs around the coronavirus creature. As you can see here, different rotate Z value and the same translate Y value. But as you can see here, we have a lot of repetition in our code, and we as the web developers don't love to create repetition. How can we do it in another way? Because I'm working with the CSS preprocessor of SAS, in SAS we have the SAS for loop. And this is exactly what I'm doing in my real project. I'm creating a SAS variable with the name of start position, and I'm giving it a value of 0 degrees. And then I'm creating a SAS for loop that have another SAS variable with the name of I that is going dynamically between 1 to 12. In every one of the iterations, this creating me dynamically a CSS selector between R1 until R12. In every one of the iterations, the SAS variable with the name of start position is getting bigger by 30 degrees, and I'm just putting this SAS variable inside the rotate Z value. And in this way, I just now created you the CSS. Nice. But I wanted this creature to feel a lot more alive, and I wanted to add some animations. But one of the problems that I had, that if every one of the hairs have a different transform value, and I want to do animation for all those hairs, I needed to create different animation for every one of those hairs in CSS. And I didn't want to write 12 different animations one by one. Then I just created them dynamically in the same SAS for loop. In this way, I'm creating all those 12 different animations in the same SAS for loop that locate me all those 12 hairs. But I wanted this creature to feel a lot more alive, and I wanted to add some animation for the eyes. And I added 2 animations for the eyes, one for the inner part of the eyes that they will move a little bit. And I wanted to create the effect that the eyes are getting close. To create that the eyes can get closed, I added here the after pseudo element. The after pseudo element is another element inside the hole of the eyes. It has a width of 100%, height of 0 pixel, and background color black. Because it has a height of 0 pixel, you don't see it, but in the animation of it, every 5 seconds, only in the last half second, it's getting a height of 100%, and in this way, the eyes are getting closed. But enough talking about all this, how I created all the design of this coronavirus creature. Now let's go to the main fun part. Let's talk about all the logic of this game. The first thing that you need to understand is how to separate all the frames that we have in our own game. And to understand that, let's take a look again on the game itself and understand what frame I created in my own game. The first frame, as you can see here, is the game menu frame. And this is one frame that we need to represent in our HTML document. The second one is when I will click on the How to Play button, it will open a pop-up. And yes, we can put frame above other frames. The third frame is when I will click on the UMI, the same way, another pop-up. And this is the third frame that we need to represent in our HTML document. And the last frame is when I will click on the Save the World button, it will hide the game menu frame, and it will open the game frame itself where we are playing the game. And in total, we have 4 frames that we need to represent in our HTML document. How I'm representing them in the HTML document? In a very easy way. I'm just creating 4 separated section HTML elements. And as you can see by the class name and by the ID name, the first one is the game menu frame. The second one is the game frame itself. The third one is the pop-up of the UMI, and the last one is the pop-up of the How to Play. But when I'm loading the game, I want to see only the game menu frame. I don't want to see all the other frames. How I'm hiding all the other frames? In a very easy way that everyone knows. I'm just giving all the other frames, display none, and in this way, when I'm loading the game in the first time, I'm only seeing the game menu frame. But now, I need to create some flags that they will tell me if something is open or something is closed. How can I create flags without using any JavaScript? But if you are thinking about input HTML elements of forms like checkboxes, they are like flags. Unchecked, false, checked, true. And this is exactly what I'm adding in the beginning of the HTML document. I'm adding 3 different input of checkboxes. And every one of them is doing different operation in my own game. The first checkbox that has the ID name of Toggle Game, if it's unchecked, this means that I want to see the game menu frame, but to hide the game frame itself. And if it's checked, it means that I want to see the game frame, but to hide the game menu frame, okay? And the 2 other checkboxes are even more simple to understand. The checkbox that has the ID name of How to Play pop-up, if it's unchecked, this means that I don't want to see the How to Play pop-up. If it's checked, of course I want to see the How to Play pop-up. The third checkbox in the same way, with the ID of who am I pop-up. If it's unchecked, I don't want to see the who am I pop-up, and if it's checked, I want to see the who am I pop-up. But those are just checkboxes that I'm putting in the beginning of the HTML document, opacity of 0, position absolute, top minus something, and you cannot see them and you cannot click on them. And now we need a way to trigger those checkboxes without clicking on them specific. How can I trigger checkboxes without using any JavaScript and without clicking on them specific? Yeah, totally. The game menu button that you saw are not button HTML element. Instead, I'm using here label HTML element. And label HTML element can trigger any input that you want with a for attribute. And as you can see here, the save the world label button element is being connected to the checkbox that has the ID name of Toggle Game. You see Toggle Game here and Toggle Game here. And this means that if I'm clicking on this label button element, it will trigger this checkbox and it will change its status from unchecked to status of checked. If you will click it again, it will change again from checked to unchecked. And as many times that you will clicking on it, the same way for the two other label buttons, for example, the who am I, this one, if I will click it, it will trigger the checkbox that has the ID of who am I pop-up, this one. This will change its status from unchecked to checked. You click it again, it will change again from checked to unchecked. But this is just changing those statuses of all those checkboxes. But it still doesn't do for us any operation, any visual operation. And now we need to use those statuses of all those checkboxes to show or hide other frames in the game. And to do that, I'm using here two special CSS features. The first feature is the check Pseudoclass. I can see if there is a specific checkbox in my HTML document, and if, and only if, it's in the status of checked, I can use the sibling element that can select any sibling element that come after, and I can give it display block, display none, and in this way I can show or hide other frames in the game. And this is exactly what I'm doing in my real game. For example, when I'm clicking on the how to play label button, it will trigger the checkbox that has the ID name of how to play pop-up, and it will change its status from unchecked to checked. And now this selector will start to work for us, because this selector is working only when this checkbox that has this ID name, it's in the status of checked. And if this checkbox is in status of checked, go to the sibling element that has the ID name of how to play, this is the real visual pop-up, and give it display block. And now this pop-up is open, but now you need to ask yourself another question. How I'm closing this pop-up? And it's really the same tricks if you are thinking about it. In this case of this specific pop-up, the X button and the close button are not button HTML element, they are label HTML element. And in this case of this specific pop-up, they both have a for attribute that is being connected to the same checkbox that has the idea of how to play pop-up. And when this pop-up is open, this meaning that this checkbox is in status of checked. And when you will click on this X button on the close button, the label button, it will trigger with the for attribute the same checkbox. It will change its status from checked to unchecked. This selector will stop to work, and we will get the display none that we declared in the beginning. And now the pop-up will be closed. Okay? Yeah. But now you need to ask yourself another question. What is happening when I'm clicking the save the world button, the play button of the game? When I'm clicking on the save button, the save the world button, the play button of the game, I need to do two operations instead of one. First, I need to hide the game menu frame, and then I need to show the game frame itself. How can I do two operations instead of one? And this is really the same tricks. When I have the checkbox that has the ID name of Toggle Game, if it's in the status of checked, first go to the sibling element that has the class name of game menu frame and give it display none. After that, go to another sibling element that has the class of game frame and give it display block. And in this way, I can do as many operations that I want with one checkbox. Of course, this being written with Sass, you can write it in CSS in two separated selectors, but in Sass it's a lot more readable to do it and to read it. Nice. Now let's continue for one of the most amazing tricks that we have in this game. We actually have here two tricks that we need to talk about them. One, when I'm clicking those coronavirus creature, they are being disappear. This is the first trick. The second trick is that I need to count all those dead viruses. Let's talk about these both tricks. The first trick, if you remember in the beginning, I told you that every coronavirus creature is a label HTML element with a class of coronavirus. And I also told you that every label with the coronavirus creature have inside input type radio. But I also told you that all the visual part of the coronavirus creature are starting here in this div class body. We have the body, and inside the body we have the eyes and the hairs. And what I'm doing in the real game, I'm doing animation on the label HTML element. I'm telling it to move with CSS animation around the screen. Because all the visual part are inside, it's also taking all the visual part with it. But because it's wrapped with a label HTML element, this means that if you are clicking on the visual part of the coronavirus creature, it's like you are clicking on the label HTML element. And if there is input type radio inside, it will automatically get triggered. In this case, you don't even need the for attribute in the ID name. This is meaning that I'm moving the label around the screen, I'm clicking on the coronavirus creature, it's like I'm clicking on the label HTML element, the input type radio is inside, it will automatically get triggered, and it will change its status from unchecked to status of checked. When this radio button is in status of checked, this is telling us that the virus, the coronavirus, is being dead, and we need to hide all the visual part of the coronavirus. And to do that, I'm just selecting every input type radio that is in status of checked, go to the sibling element with a class of body. This is all the visual part of the coronavirus creature, and just give it opacity of 0. In this way, I'm clicking this coronavirus creature, and they are being disappeared from the screen. And now let's talk about the second magic. To do the CSS score of the game, I'm using here a very special CSS feature that is existing a lot of time, the CSS counter feature. In order to it to work properly, you need to define it before all the input type radio that we have in our own game. The easiest place is just to put it on the body HTML element. How are you creating a CSS counter? You're selecting the body HTML element, you are using the property of counter reset, and you can give it here any name that you want. I gave it the name Corona. And now I need to count all those dead viruses. How I'm counting them? I'm selecting every input type radio that is in status of checked, counter increment, incrementing the Corona value that I created here. To print the total score to the screen, in order to it to work properly, you need to define it in the HTML after all the input type radio that you have in your own game. The easiest place is just to put it in the bottom of the HTML document. I created here the div class sum, and you can see the text score here, and I want to print after the total score. To do that, I'm selecting the class of sum with the after pseudo element. I'm using here the content property that's using the native CSS counter function that just printing me the Corona value that I incremented here and created here. And in this way, it's always listening and printing the total score to the screen. Because it's a very complicated example, let's see a small live code demo that you will understand it in a better way. As you can see here, I created kind of 5 coronavirus creature. The visual part of the coronavirus creature, you need to remember, is this part. This div class body, this is the big black circle, yes? And the eyes and the hairs in the real games are here, inside the body, okay? And you can even see the input type radio here. In the real game, it's with opacity of 0 and you don't see it. And I have a place to summarize the total score. The text score is coming from the HTML, but the numbers are coming from the CSS. To create a CSS counter, I'm selecting the body HTML element and created the CSS counter with the property of counter reset, and I gave it the name Corona. Every input type radio that is in status of check, incrementing the Corona value. Beside of this, if the input type radio is in status of checked, go to the sibling element with class of body and give it opacity of 0. You see, if this input type radio will be checked, go to the sibling element, all the visual part of the coronavirus creature, and just give it opacity of 0. In this way, when this radio button will be checked, all this big black circle will be disappear. To summarize the score, I'm just selecting the class of sum, this class, using here the after pseudo element with the content property that using the CSS counternating function that's just printing me the corona value that we incremented here and created here. And let's see that it really works. I'm clicking, the score is going up, the radio button is being checked. And with this way, we are creating a pure CSS score for a pure CSS game. Nice. But let's continue to another amazing trick. How we can create pure CSS countdown. Let's see it in a real live code demo. As you can see here in the HTML, the numbers are not coming from the HTML. They're instead coming from the CSS. What is actually happening here is that I'm doing animation on the before and the after pseudo element. As you can see, we have here animation on the content property, but it's going only between 9 to 0. But here it's going between 99 to 0. What is actually happening here is that we have two separated animation. This like one number is just two separated string with CSS animation. That we understand exactly what's happening here. Let's print here the text AA, and you will see that these both numbers are being separated. They don't have any real connection between of them. What is actually happening here is just two separated strings that are only looking like one number, one integer. They are very synchronized. And how it really works. As you can see here, I'm selecting the class of count with the before pseudo element that calling the animation of countdown. This animation. And it's working for 100 seconds and one iteration. Because I have here a total of 10 frames, every 10 seconds it will go one number down, 20 seconds another, 30 seconds another. After it will finish the first iteration, I want it to stack on the last frame of the animation. To do that, I'm using here the forwards keyword value that telling the animation when you are finished all your iteration, please be stuck on the last frame of the animation. This was for the first value. For the second value, I'm using the after pseudo element and I'm calling the same animation but in a different way. I'm telling the animation to work for 10 seconds and 10 iteration. 10 seconds and 10 iteration, 10 seconds for animation that has 10 frames, this means that every 1 second will go one number down, 2 seconds another, 3 seconds another, and so on and so on. When it will finish the first iteration, it will do it again for another 9 iterations. Why? Because I declared the animation that I want it to work for a total of 10 iterations. And after all those 10 iterations, I want that the second value will be stuck again on the 0 value, on the last frame of the animation, and again I'm just putting here the forwards value. And when it will finish, it will be stuck on the 0 value again because I told it to stack on the last frame of the animation. And let's see that it really works. Let's count together. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, finish. Nice! But let's continue to more interesting stuff. Random values. First I want to show you why I wanted to do random stuff in my own game. And let's take a look again on the game. You will see that every coronavirus creature have different location in the game. It actually have 6 different locations on the y-axis. Even the scale of the virus is being randomized. Even the rotation of it is being randomized. But wait a minute, how can we create random stuff in CSS? You can't, but you can do it with Sass. Because it's a very important example, I want first to show you this in the real code, but you need to understand that if every coronavirus creature have different location, this means that I need to create 100 different animation for all those locations for every one of the coronavirus creature. And you can guess that I didn't want to write it one by one. Then how I done it, you can guess, and let's see it in the real code because it's very important. As you can see here, there is a for loop that is running 100 iteration. I just created dynamically a CSS animation 100 times with the Sass for loop. As you can see here, every coronavirus creature in the animation have 6 different locations. The translate X is always the same, but the translate Y, I'm using here the Sass random function that randomizes me, for example, a value between 1 to 80, and I'm just doubling it in 1 VH. Even for the scale, I use the random function, and even for the rotation, I use the Sass random function. that you will not be afraid from this function, I want to show you another example with the SAS random function that you won't be afraid, and that you won't be afraid from the HTML. Let's see the compiled HTML, just regular HTML, nothing special. 6 empty li HTML elements. You see? The numbers that you're seeing inside of them is not coming from the HTML, it's coming from the CSS code. And what I'm doing in the SAS code, I just created a SAS for loop that is running 6 iteration, creating me dynamically all the CSS selector between class 1 to class 6, and dynamically every one of them in the before pseudo element in the content property, using the SAS random function, randomize me value between 1 to 80 and just doubling it in 1 VH. And all those values are really randomized. For you to believe me that they are really randomized, I just need to do a small change in the code and those numbers need to be changed. To do a change in the code, the only thing that I need to do is just to press enter in the SAS code and it will be compiled and the number will be changed. If I will do it again, it will happen again. Every time that I'm compiling the SAS code, the numbers are being changed. And you need to remember, there are no random stuff in CSS. In order to those values to change, I need to compile the SAS code to CSS again and again and again. That you will understand what is happening behind the hood, let's see the compiled CSS. Just regular CSS, nothing special, okay? Easy to use. Okay, let's talk about the next trick. After 99 seconds in the game, I'm putting in animation, the game over curtain, and I wanted to create the effect that the player can play this game again and again and again. And I needed a way to think about how can I reset all this game. And I understand that in order to get back to the game menu navigation, I need to reset all the checkboxes that was being checked to unchecked. To reset the CSS core, I need to reset all the radio button that was in state of checked to unchecked as well. How can I do it? To do that, instead of using the label HTML element, the back to main menu button is a special button. It's not a label. In this case, I put it with an input with type of reset. And in order to input type of reset to work, the only thing that I needed to do is just to wrap all the HTML project with the form HTML element. And I'm just putting this button, you're clicking on it and it's resetting all the checkboxes, all the radio buttons, and if all the checkboxes are in status of checked, this will bring me automatically to the game menu navigation. And now you can play the game again and again and again. And the last question that you need to ask me, how can I know exactly when to put this game over curtain? And this is one of the most easiest tricks that I have in my own game. Everyone knows that animation can get animation duration. This is telling the animation how much time it needs to take from the start to the end. But what we are often forget, that animation can get another duration, the animation delay duration. I can tell the animation that it will start, for example, in the real game after 99 seconds. And this is exactly what I'm doing in the real game. In this example, I only put here animation delay of 5 seconds, that we don't need to wait 99 seconds. And let's refresh the screen, and we will count together between 1 to 5 to see that it really works. Let's refresh the screen and we'll count. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Game over! Okay, we saw here a lot of CSS tricks that with them you can create pure CSS games, and maybe you're thinking that this is the main key takeaway of this talk, but it isn't. What is the most important thing that I want you to take from this talk is to create your own project, but only for fun. Not for your company, not for your friends, not for money, only for fun. Think about something that you want to create. And why it's so important to create project only for fun? We as adults, we're starting to forget that the best way to learn new stuff is by playing. When we are kids, we're doing it naturally. But when we are adults, we're starting to learn things in the boring, in the hard way. Instead of creating and playing with code and enjoying, it's a lot less frustrating. You will enjoy it. In the end, you will succeed and you will have fun. In this way, if you are playing with code, you are getting to be a better web developer. If you are getting to be a better web developer, in the end, you will get a better salary. And even this is not important because the most important thing in life is to have fun. Create your own project because you can create them. And before we finish, my friend, I'm Elad Shechter. I'm a CSS HTML architect. Mainly I'm doing not CSS games. And I'm doing a lot of stuff, the new CSS reset, a lot of projects, a lot of other talks. In Hebrew, you can find them, all of the talks in my own website. I'm writing a lot of articles that you can see in Medium. You can follow me via my Twitter. I'm publishing all the new stuff there. And my friends, thank you very much for listening. It's time for questions. You can give them in Hebrew, English, Japanese, Spanish, German, any language that you want. Yes.
אמרת, הזכרת את ה-CSS function שנקראת counter.
כן.
יש עוד כאלה?
קודם כל ב-CSS יש מאמר מעולה ב-CSS טריק, כל הפונקציות שקיימות ב-CSS, כי יש לנו, שמים לב שכבר יש הרבה פונקציות ב-CSS עם סוגריים עגולות, ויש איזה מאמר מרוכז, היסטרי ב-CSS טריק שהם אשכרה, בואו נחפש אותו ביחד אם אתם רוצים, בואו נראה CSS טריקס, CSS טריקס, CSS function, זה בוא. A complete guide for CSS function. תקשיב, הדבר הזה יוצא לכם את המוח. יש לכם פה בצד ימין URL, attribute, calc, lang, not, רגע זה ממשיך, רגע יש פה מלא. CSS custom property, color function, animation, nth child, path, last child, steps, sizing, scale, brightness, blur. חבר'ה, יש פה אין סוף של דברים מגניבים שחלקם אתם מכירים וחלקם אין לכם סיכוי לדעת. אין סוף של דברים, קלאמפ, זה כאילו רק חוויה להסתכל ולעבור על זה, אין סוף. אתה יכול לעבור על זה, אני יכול לעבור על זה ימים שלמים. זה לא נגמר, באמת. ולא בטוח שהוא מעודכן, כי זה גם נכתב לפני הרבה זמן, אז וואו, כאילו, אם זה הכיוון, אז תחפש שם, זה בהחלט זה. עוד שאלות? אל תתביישו, אני לא נושך, באמת, אני משתדל, כאילו לפעמים בורח לי, אבל לא, בדרך כלל לא. כן.
בעברית?
בעברית? בטח. קיוויתי שמישהו ישאל ביפנית, משהו מעניין, אבל לא, בסדר, אני זורם לי, יאללה, זורם לי.
בחרת שם רדיו אלמנט, ברגע שלוחצים, אז רדיו אלמנט הופך אותו לאופסיטי זירו, כדי שלא יראו אותו במסך, נכון?
נכון.
זה רדיו, בחרת רדיו כדי שאם ילחצו עליו פעם שנייה שלא...
נכון. כאילו הרדיו בטנס, ברגע שאתם לוחצים עליו וזהו, נהיה צ'קט, לוחצים עליו שוב, לא זז, צ'קט.
אתה חוזר למסך.
נכון, בדיוק, אתה יכול לקום לתחייה אם הייתם לוחצים עליו שוב.
עכשיו למה עושים את הצ'קט? למה עושים את ה...
כן, בגלל שרציתי שהוא זהו, תקוע. כן, עוד שאלות. כן.
שהקורונה ויירוס נכנס את האנימציה, אז כאילו מבחינת הוויף של המסך אני שואל, כאילו לחצת, זה נעלם, אבל אם אני לחץ עוד פעם...
זה לא יקרה כלום, כי השתמשתי ברדיו בטנס, ורדיו בטנס יכול להפוך פעם אחת לצ'קט וזהו.
לא, אבל עשית אופסיטי.
נכון.
עדיין קיים.
נכון. להגיד לך קודם כל, לא יכול להשתנות כאילו בצ'קט.
כאילו אם אני לחץ יכול להיות שכאילו אם יעלה לי קורונה ויירוס או קורונה ויירוס...
כן, אפשר לשחק אולי, אני האמת שלא חשבתי על זה, כי זה לא יכול לקרות אצלי, כי כולם לא יכולים באמת לעלות אחד אחרי השני כי מסונכרנים. אבל אפשר אולי לשחק עם Z אינדקס במצב שהוא מת, אני לא בדקתי את זה, לא ניסיתי את זה, לעשות Z אינדקס. דרך אגב, הסיבה שהשתמשתי באופסיטי ולא בדיספליי נאן, כי רציתי שיהיה פייד אאוט.
הבנתי.
זו הסיבה היחידה. כי דיספליי נאן זה היה הכי זה, אהבתי אותו. כן, אבל הבעיה שהוא כזה, לא רציתי, מה?
כשזה לחוץ, אפשר להשתמש בפוינטר איבנט נאן, ואז...
נכון, פוינטר איבנט נאן, גם, כן, אבל אני צריך לראות שזה באמת עובד, כי אני עדיין משחק על החלק הוויזואלי, אני לא משפיע על הלייבל, אני מקווה שהלייבל אולי כן דופק טוב, ואז אני אדרך להגיע ללייבל. ועדיין גם את זה אפשר לפתור, כי אפשר לשים את כל הרדיו בטן מבחוץ, ואיתם להגיע לווירוסים. כאילו אפשר לחשוב, אני יכול לסובב את זה ולסובב את זה, לחשוב על דברים הרדיו בטן הם כן אינפור, ואני יוצר אותם בלולה, ואז אני יכול לגשת ובאמת לעשות את מה שאמרת, כאילו לעשות פוינטר איבנט נאן, ואז גם אם אתה לוחץ עליו זה כאילו חוצה אותו. כאילו אפשר לפתור את זה, הכל פתיר. ודרך אגב, זה הרעיון המגניב, כי אתם חייבים יצירתיות לעשות את הדברים האלה. אז תעשו פרויקטים לא רק ב-CSS, כאילו ב-JavaScript, בכל מה שבא לכם, שחקו עם קוד, וכאילו, זה פרויקט, זה מצחיק, עשיתי את זה, אני אספר לך את הסיפור האמיתי כזה קצר, אבל עשיתי את הפרויקט הזה, אני אמרתי לכם בהתחלה, הייתי הרצאה ראשונה בחול, 5 דקות בפולין, בסוף 2019, ורציתי להיכנס להרבה כנסים בחו"ל. אז כאילו היה פעם ראשונה שזה היה התלהבות. והתקבלתי כזה לכנס במרץ, בסוף מרץ ברוסיה, במאי, בליטא, אמרתי, הנה זה קורה. הגיעה הקורונה, כנסים בוטלו, הכל עבר לאונליין. כאילו וואלה, הייתי אמור בסוף שבוע הזה להיות ברוסיה. וכאילו, טוב, נתקעתי בבית, מה עושים? עשיתי את המשחק הזה. עכשיו, המשחק הזה, זה ההרצאה הכי מובילה שלי, כאילו, הכי פופולרית שלי מכל ההרצאות שעשיתי באנגלית. כאילו, זו הרצאה שהעברתי אותה כבר ב-17 מדינות, הרוב באונליין, כן? אבל חלק גם פיזי בצרפת וקרואטיה. אבל, כאילו, אני תמיד אומר, כל דבר שקורה בחיים, בגלל שהם באמת קצרים, ואני לא סתם אומר את זה, הדבר היחידי שמפחיד אותי היום בחיים זה המוות. חוץ מזה לא מפחיד אותי שום דבר, אפשר לפטר אותי, לא מפחיד אותי כלום. מוות זה הדבר היחידי שמנהל אותי. ייגמר הכסף, לא מעניין אותי, אני אסתדר. כאילו ברמה הזאת, הפחד היחידי זה מוות. וברגע זה נשמע רע פה זה, אבל זה מה שמנהל אותי. אז כל סיטואציה רעה שקורית, ואתם עדיין בחיים, תהנו, תהפכו אותה למשהו חיובי. תיקחו את המשהו הרע ותהפכו אותו לטוב. עוד שאלות?
מבחינת ביצועים, ה-CSS עשית פה דברים מטורפים, והכנסת סוג של JavaScript ופונקציות ולופים בתוך ה-CSS. איך זה מבחינת ביצועים, כאילו, זה לא מומלץ?
קודם כל, הלופים לא עולים לך כלום. אתה יודע למה? כי זה, אתה מקפל את ה-SAS ל-CSS פעם אחת וזהו, זה נגמר. אז קודם כל, הלופים חינם. אתה מקפל את זה CSS ניתן כ-CSS, לא משמעותי. מה שכן יכול לעלות לך הרבה כסף, זה האנימציות. גם אנימציות ב-CSS הן עולות הרבה כסף, ושעושים הרבה אנימציות הן עולות כסף. בהתחלה חלק מהאנימציות, כאילו רק כדי לקדם את המשחק, עשיתי אותם לא חכם, עשיתי אנימציות על פוזישנים, וזה היה ממש איטי, ואז העברתי את האנימציות לטרנספורם, שזה הוריד לי הרבה מעלויות, וגם אז היה חלק מהדברים שעלו לי כל כך הרבה, לדוגמה מכשירי אנדרואיד, שלא הצליחו לסחוב את המשחק, שמתי פה כפתור של היי פרפורמנס, לוחץ הופך את לא פרפורמנס, ומה שמיוחד, תסתכל, אתה רואה את האנימציות, את העיניים ואת השערות לא זזות, הופ, זה כאילו ככה זה, הופ, עוצר, הופ. עכשיו הדבר הזה כאילו אפשר למכשירי האנדרואיד לעבוד, כי זה לא עבד לי באנדרואיד, והתבאסתי, אמרתי איך אני עושה כפתור פרפורמנס, כל מה שזה עושה, צ'קבוק מסומן, מבטל לי חלק מהאנימציות, טק, עובד. עוד שאלות?
היית שולח אותם לאתר של אפל.
כן, לקנות, לא נעים להגיד כמה שאני אייפוניסט, כאילו וואלה, הדפדפן של הספארי, זה הדפדפן, מי שלא יודע, באייפון אי אפשר להוריד דפדפנים כרום ופיירפוקס. כשאתם מורידים כרום ופיירפוקס זה תחפושת של ספארי. הבייסיק זה ספארי, מחופש כאילו לכרום, ועוד יותר גרוע מאינטרנט אקספלורר, כי ברגע שאין יותר עדכונים ל-iOS, אתה לא יכול להתקן דפדפן. אתה נתקע עם פיצ'רים ישנים, ואז בגלל זה יש האייפון עם 6, תקועים עם iOS 12, ואתם לא יכולים לראות דפדפן. תורידו כרום 98, 2000, זה לא משנה, הוא עובד עם iOS של 12 מאחורי הפלאים. כן.
השתמשת בוויל צ'יינג'?
האמת שנראה לי שלא, לא היה צורך, כי האמת שהוויל צ'יינג' זה אחד הפרופרטי הכי מנופחים שיש, שדיברו עליהם, איזה כיף, איזה זה, אבל אני חושב שעושים את האנימציות נכון, הוא פחות קריטי. הוא כן קריטי, משתמשים בו על פוזישן ודברים כאלה, אז אולי הוא עוזר לדפדפן קצת להבין יותר, אבל כשמשתמשים בטרנספורם, אני לא ראיתי בזה רווח. אתה יודע, נראה לי שאפילו לא עשיתי טסט על זה, ולא ראיתי שהרווחתי מזה משהו, אבל להגיד לך שאני מומחה אנימציות, יש פה אנשים שאוכלים אותי בלי מלך באנימציות. אני דווקא ארכיטקטורות בשביל הכיף, זה דווקא היוצא מן הכלל שלי, זה כמו שאמרתי לכם, לכיף, כי אפשר לעשות כיף, כי חיים פעם אחת ותעשו מה שבא לכם ותהנו ותחיו ותעשו חיים. עוד שאלות? לא? אז תודה רבה לכם.